Hey everyone, how's it going? We are back with the Inspired series again. This time joining us is the Inspired Accountant. Now when I first made this Inspired series, I wasn't that inspired about the game itself, but when I discovered the dedication ceremony reversed accounts combo, boy did my life change! Netrunner became a lot more fun, and I guess a big reason for that is because to make the most maximum use of this combo, you actually need to run good ice and protect your remote server. So it actually encourages the fun aspect of Netrunner, which is using ice strategically, building good servers, and taxing the runner through your remote. That's what Netrunner is supposed to be, and we'll be looking at that more today. I'm sorry if you're tired of this reverse accounts dedications combo, but to be honest, that's one of the very few things remaining that make ice-based builds even viable. So bear with me, we'll be playing this until the new cycle comes in. So we are going to do, as I said, the dedication reverse combo, but this time not in Wayland, but in everyone's least favorite faction, NBN. It's time for NBN to shine, and we are not going to play CTM. We are going to look at New Angeles Soul, so this should be pretty fun. If you look at the rest of the operations I'm running, you'll see how this deck all comes together very nicely and synergistically. We are running 3 dedication ceremonies and then 3 beanstalks for money, but also to pad out the 6 alliance cards required to run consulting visits for free. This means that we can now see our turn 1 scarcity with that much more consistency, which is very important because scarcity is by far the best court current that you can run in New Angeles Soul. No questions. Right now with the current meta as it is, where Anarchs are mostly reliant on neutral resources and liberated accounts, and where Haley decks all need to have lots of resources going, that scarcity can be a game changer, and it's a huge reason why we want to play this in Soul. Otherwise, again, Wayland is just outright better. So, we have all of that, and the consulting visits double up as a tutoring tool for us to assemble a C-Source exchange combo. This allows us to run only one off of each because we know that with consulting visits we can always fetch the other piece readily, and we have the clicks to do it. It takes exactly 3 clicks, which is your whole turn, to play consulting visit and one of those C-Source or exchange normally. So that's the deck, that's what it's based on. We add in some taxing ice and this is what it looks like. Now, I'm sure you all are familiar with the thinking emoji by now, but if you're not, this means that it's time to put on your thinking caps and pause the video, because what I want you to think about is, how am I going to fill out my agenda suite? I've put the 7 most obvious, strongest NBN agendas in this deck because we're trying to play a good deck here, but we are missing 4 agenda points. So, have a think. What are the best agendas for this deck? Pause the video, we'll be revealing the answer shortly. Alrighty, so it's a pretty tough one. Again, NBN doesn't have a lot of strong agendas left. I was very tempted to go with the next strongest agenda, which conventionally is Corporate Sales Team, because it is very powerful when scored, but it doesn't really synergize this deck. I realized very quickly that the C-Source exchange combo just wasn't going to work if you're only playing 15 minutes as your only 1-point agenda. So it has to be 1-pointers that go in, and here are the 2. Quantum Predictive Model is a no-brainer, and I'm sure many of you figured this one out. This is a very natural fit in this deck, especially since we're already running 3 Data Ravens. We can definitely punish the runner for being Tag Me without Film Critic running through Data Ravens, and we can even swap these points that the runner has earned for us into big agendas like Global Food, which they stole earlier on. This is a very good combo. Again, another big reason to be playing NBN instead of any other faction. The thing about agendas is that you cannot splash them in other factions, so naturally they lend a bigger weight as to whether you should be playing that faction, and QPM is a very big reason to stay in NBN. The other agenda I'm looking at is Improved Tracers, which is something that is overlooked by many. As it turns out, my deck is more than half Tracers, and it also boosts my ice against most of the common breakers. If you're thinking of stuff like MK Ultra, Paperclip, all these are affected by Improved Tracers quite markedly. Especially MK Ultra, if you can boost them just outside of their range, they have to pay an extra 3 credits every time they want to run through it, which is pretty nasty. Also, another big reason why we are playing 3 1s instead of 4 2s is that we want to be able to play these agendas and score them out early. This is something you can't really do with 4 2s as they are pretty telegraphed. Whereas with 3-1s, the runner typically won't contest your never advanced cards because they think they are safe. They think that NBN has no more threats in faction and they can allow 3 advanced agendas to slide. Well, you can prove them wrong by scoring at improved traces and make their life twice as difficult. I've always said that 3-1 agendas are horrible, and they certainly are. They are bloating our deck space. If you look at our deck list here, that will bring us up to 11 agendas, which is pretty nasty. But given that most of them are defensive agendas, QPM and 15 minutes and global foods, I think that is rather acceptable. So thankfully, this means that we'll get to see these 3-1s in faction. And yeah, with that, we can spend our remaining deck slot. This leaves us with 1 free deck slot to include our 16th piece of ice. And since we're running improved tracers, why not pick the best tracer, Archangel? So that's our deck rounded out. Let's give it a whirl. We're gonna instantly mulligan our opening hand here because we are up against Omar and have not nearly enough ice. So we mulligan into a hand with just as little ice as before. Well, this is gonna be a problem. So not a very good start. There's a hedge fund there, but that's about it. Unfortunately, even my mandatory draw draws me nothing but a global food, which I don't want at this moment. So I could play the News Hound, but after some thought I realized, why not just go for the turn 1 scarcity? After all, if they are Omar, chances are they are probably not running Magnum Opus. They're probably relying on neutral economy, resource economy at that, as well as liberated accounts. So I'm very happy. As you see, my opponent attempts to play a career fair there, but epic fails because scarcity is out. Whoops, too bad. So nope, no daily cast for you. It's going to be a real annoying battle for my opponent. Unfortunately, they instead go for the super aggressive turn 1 more route, which kind of utterly destroys me as the very first run knocks my combo out of the game, literally. I have no recursion cards at all in this deck, so once the sea source was gone, I knew that the sea exchange combo was off the table for the rest of the game. And that was a very sobering realization that the way I constructed my initial deck, this is really very vulnerable to milling. And this is the sort of process that's abstracted from a lot of Netrunner players out there. When you look at good players and their wonderful decks, or something like my YouTube videos sometimes, you just don't see the process of failure that takes place behind the scenes and are not present in the final cut. Sometimes you actually need to play a couple of games with those decks that you theory craft in order to find those weaknesses that are so glaring, because only through this process of self-discovery will you realize, oh, this is why the good players don't include this card or build their decks this way, because it just crumbles straight up, just as my deck does here, as I'm unable to pursue my alternate win con. I'm not going to continue showing this game in its entirety, simply because it ended up devolving into a very sluggish game where both sides were clicking for credits for the longest time. Instead, I'll give you a glance into the board state about halfway through the game. After quite a few more and Bagat mills, you can see clearly that they have been very disruptive. My opponent had those agenda points in the bin that I could never prevent them from getting, because there's no Jacksons and no means of saving those agendas. And not to mention that my entire combo, the C exchange combo, was all milled into the bin. So at that point, I realized that I had absolutely no chance against a more Anarch that packed Stim Hack, because as long as they Stim Hacked my remote anytime I had an advanced card in it, there was almost no chance of me winning. With the regular agenda scoring plan and the exchange plans off the table, my deck is basically dead against this sort of matchup. So there needs to be something done about this, and I went back to the drawing board. Our opponent today is Jonas, also known as the Big Unit 3000, and this means that they are a Comrade, which means that we are probably playing against Comrade's Val. So right off the bat, I have some intel advantage over my opponent. Knowing that, I'm going to keep my opening hand. It has lots of ice, it has money, and most importantly, it has the turn 1 scarcity of resources, which is tutorable. for Consulting Visit. Again, this is one of the amazing things about playing Consulting Visit in Sol. Typically, people would play 3 Scarcity and 1 or 2 Targeted Marketings. By playing Convis, instead what I'm getting is 5 copies of Scarcity in my deck. Very reliable turn 1 Scarcity, and that is what cripples runners. Also note that, unlike with other corps, you can't simply erase the turn 1 Scarcity by aggressively running centrals. Typically, especially if you're playing aggressive Consulting Visit into Scarcity, you're leaving 1 or more centrals open, which means that if they steal an agenda, your Scarcity just drops in the bin and they can play resources as normal. That is bad. But in Sol, they cannot do this. The only way they can get around Scarcity is by playing their current of their own. So that's good for us. My opponent, Dirty Laundry's HQ click 1, misses the 1 in 4 food in hand. So that's good. You notice that I decided to play Beanstalk before playing the Convis. That was probably a mistake, but whatever. My opponent goes for a mining accident here, and I ham and haw. This is a tough decision because my deck is really about taxing the runner with my horribly taxing ice. But so yeah, I almost always pay the 5 credits here. The reason I cannot pay the 5 credits here is because that would put me on 0 credits, which isn't so bad if not for the fact that I could potentially lose my scarcity of resources. If my opponent steals an agenda on the last click, scarcity goes in the bin and I cannot replay it because it costs 1 to play. So that was a very, very unfortunate mining accident. If I started with a hedge fund in my opener instead, I would have had 1 more credit. I could have survived on with a single credit to replay the scarcity. I probably would have taken the 5 credit hit there. That is how important bad pub is to the runner in this matchup, because I know that breakers are going to be inefficient and getting the every single bad pub is going to pay off for them in the long run. Now, I don't get any more money cards. Instead, I'm flooded with ice, so I know that most of my ice is going to end up res. I need the money for it. The next few turns is going to be spent clicking for credits. Really not much to say there. Same with my opponent. They're going to click for credits the hard way. That liberated account was played through the scarcity. That's right, my opponent paid 8 credits for that liberated. They are only gaining net 8 instead of net 10 off that liberated for 5 clicks. It's awful, but that's their own problem. Big misplay on my part. I should not have played the remote ice. I was thinking of rushing in case I drew a Bew, but the correct play there was actually to play an ice on archives to prevent further dirty laundries. With every dirty laundry my opponent plays, they get further and further ahead. Because obviously this means that they can accrue their credit advantage, and that's what they have now. They have 19 credits. They don't have to run. They're just going to sit there and get more money because scarcity is going to drain so much of it. So I'm allowing my opponent to actually get away with this money influx. So during this time, while they're still accruing money and don't really have breakers yet, I need to get something going. So I try to score the QPM here. Now, this is one really bad thing about the license corporate town combo that you observe right here. This is where I would completely 100% jam the license acquisition and take advantage of the fact that the runner's not running, except that I don't have a corporate town in hand or in my bin, so I cannot actually trigger the combo. So I had to make do with a subpar agenda, which is the QPM, the remote. You really don't want to score a QPM early. It's worth a measly 1 point. The runner can easily score it for you later, and yeah, it just has no additional benefit from scoring. So it's awful. It's just really awful. And as agendas, my HQ will probably start piling with agendas sometime soon. I decided to put Raven on HQ as well. I have a very strong feeling I'm going to get flooded sooner or later. Now, I'm probably not going to bait my opponent into running a remote here. I kind of don't mind if they get the QPM and host it on their now newly acquired Film Critic, which is, by the way, the restricted card for Comrades Val, further confirming my suspicions. Even if they are spending 3 clicks, 1 to run and 2 to liberate the QPM of their Film Critic, I'm still coming out ahead. And most importantly, that remote is so taxing. It's Raven into Newshound. That is incredibly expensive. My opponent is breaking it with MK Ultra. So I'm actually happy if my opponent decides to run here, but instead they decide to continue moneying up. Bloody hell, 25 credits. Again, they need that many credits because they had to pay the extra price for the turning wheel and the critic. So I'm just going to score the QPM regularly here and then jam the food in the remote. Mostly because I want the food out of circulation ASAP. If I can score it, I'll be halfway to winning the game if my opponent fetches it. That's not the end of the world because I have the exchange combo. Or rather, it's somewhere in my deck. I want to make sure that my opponent has a food in the area. That's the ideal scenario when your opponent steals a global food as their first agenda. This means that you can do exchange shenanigans anytime from then on. Especially since Anarchs typically don't pack Shadow Net or Artist Colony, so they have no way to get rid of the food. Now my opponent plays a turntable, which was really curious. I was shocked. I was taken aback because Comrade Spell doesn't run more, certainly not more, but they don't run any console to begin with. But then I realized it's Jonas, it's the big unit. That's their avatar. That makes so much sense now. Of course I should have seen it coming. It was in the display picture all along. So turntables up, which is very tricky because we are gonna have a lot of fun trading agendas between each other, aren't we? Someone's exchanging, the other one's turntabling, which means I basically have to save my exchange combo for the final blow. I don't want to exchange prematurely because any global foods that I bring to my side can be easily turntabled back. So my opponent stim hacks this remote. Goes for it because a double advance card is pretty scary, and they're right, they need to steal this agenda. So I do the maths quickly and realize that the News Hound in there is not going to cost any real credits to my opponent between the 2 bad pub and the 9 stim hack credits, so I didn't bother rezzing the inner ice. I just made sure that they had to clear the tag at the end of the turn by rezzing the Raven. That taxes them out a fair bit, and they can have the food for all I care. The big question is whether my opponent actually hosts it on Film Critic. They decide not to. So it's in their score area, it's live, I can exchange it if I so choose to. They are still pretty rich at 21 credits, so I need to continuously drag my opponent through that remote. This is the goal of the game. So I find a project build here. I have to decide build or Wampoa, build or Wampoa. I went with the Wampoa here. Could be the wrong decision. I'm hoping my opponent runs it there. Running a Wampoa through a taxing remote is win-win for me as the corp. If they run it, they are losing a lot of money for something that's not an agenda. If they don't run it, I'm going to get a couple of Wampoa triggers. Well, okay, not so much a win-win for me. I really wanted them to run it and they didn't. Plan foiled, not much I can do about it. But since I've got the Wampoa in the remote, might as well make the most out of it by burying this global food that I will not need for the rest of the game. Now, I could put the food back in R&D, but since Wampoa is live, I realized why not, especially since Archives is guarded. I might as well just put my IPO back in Archives, in R&D. Who knows, I might shuffle my deck later on, and drawing an extra money card will be very important in this matchup. And anyway, if my opponent does decide to run Archives for some unfathomable reason this turn, at least I can still Wampoa the global food away, since I haven't triggered Wampoa on the runner's turn yet. So that's my reasoning behind that. Again, I don't need the second and third copy of Global Food anymore. All I need is the first copy of Global Food to be my opponent's score area, and we are good. Yeah, subsequent copies of food are pretty bad because it's unlikely that I'll be able to pump them out through the remote, and they are worth 2 points to the runner, which is quite bad. I only want my opponent to steal 1 point agendas. Alright, so they bounce off R&D, which, by the way, all important servers are fortified with Ravens by now. R&D Raven, HQ Raven, Remote Raven. Not very effective against Film Critic, but when I eventually do draw my Corporate Town, that is when things will get fun. Because Corporate Town can snipe that Film Critic even if they're not tagged, and this can open up new win conditions for me if my opponent steals a QPM. As you notice, I'm looking at my opponent's bin. They actually have a Film Critic in their bin. Typically, Comrade Svel runs 2 copies of Film Critic, so given that the last copy of Film Critic is now on the table, it is vulnerable to Corporate Town trashing. So basically, at this point, I'm just waiting for Corporate Town to appear. There's no reason for me to do anything at this point other than to score the license acquisition and trigger Corporate Town, because there are some very juicy targets on the table. Turning Wheel is a big threat, a big win con for my opponent. I need to get that off. Same with Film Critic, because once Film Critic's out of the game, I can easily start scoring QPMs. My opponent can't do anything about it. So yeah, I'm just waiting for Corporate Town right here. In the meantime, just clicking out for credits so that I can actually abuse my credit lead to do stuff. My opponent's still very rich. We are looking at a 23 to 5 credit differential there. So I'm not in the best of shapes. Definitely not in a good position to abuse Brian Stinson just yet, which I've just drawn. So now my opponent has played 2 mining accidents already. I had to take the 5 credit hit on the second one, which explains why I'm so poor right now. But I really just cannot afford to give my opponent the bad pub. They finally realized that they really shouldn't be letting this Wampoa go, and I'm very happy with this. Usually you have to override the Wampoa yourself when you decide to score an agenda, but here my opponent's doing it for me. They are running through their remote on their own terms, taking their own credit hit. I would think this is actually not that good a move by my opponent. They should have let me just overwrite it manually because I would have do it sooner or later. In any case, I'm not complaining. They spent the money running through my remote. Now the credit differential is a lot less. I can now attempt to never advance bait them again. This looks like a BU, but it's not. It's a Brian Stinson. If you run through that remote, you're going to be a very, very sad runner. And again, my opponent doesn't bite. So annoying. My opponent just doesn't bite. But even if unfortunately I didn't have a BU in my hand. Otherwise, this would have been a good chance to pop the BU in the server. I was too scared. I decided to bury the BU that I had previously with Wampoa. So there's 1 food and 1 Wampoa down in R&D. I mandatorily drew a BU. I was so elated to see that. I was like, okay, this is the agenda I need to score. Now, just like the license acquisition in my hand, BU is a blank agenda. Right? It doesn't do anything when scored. But the main thing, the very important thing, is that I need it for 2 agenda points. Every single agenda point is so difficult to score as NBN nowadays because breaking news is no longer a thing, Astro is no longer a thing. So a BU is a welcome respite. And again, since my opponent doesn't bother with contesting my remotes, I'm just going to score the BU here casually, get 2 more points, and very importantly, also override the hacktivist they just played. They only managed to get an Earthrise on the table with their hacktivist up, so they got a 2 credit discount on their Earthrise. Rather, that's more like paying the regular price. But now scarcity is back in effect. They can't play resources without paying the extra price. But they're going for an indexing to counter me as I take advantage of this scoring window. Now the 2 bad part my opponent has, one from Valencia and one from the early mining accident, is really helping out. They are able to get through R&D without paying with MK Ultra. They're simply letting the trace fire, and I can't do much about it. It's a trace 3. They just need to pay with 2 bad pub and 1 real credit. So it's a very cheap run for them as long as they remember to clear the tag at the end of it. So the question is, do they find an agenda with indexing? And if they do they rerun R&D to fetch the agenda? Because this means they have to spend their last 2 clicks clearing tags, which puts them below Brian Stinson range. Take note that they do not know that it's Brian Stinson in the remote hanging out there as the upgrade. They're probably still thinking it's red herrings or something. So this could be interesting. They do not run R&D again, but I cannot assume that there are no agendas in R&D. My opponent might have placed it as the second card, waiting to snipe it next turn. So I drew up, I saw the reversed accounts, and it immediately went to the remote. Both me and my opponent know what that is. That's the reversed accounts. Are they going to go for it? We'll see. I'm not sure if they know at this point that Dedication Ceremony is not in my deck. I removed them for Corporate Towns. I'm not sure if they saw it. So here they play another Hacktivist, discarding the 3rd copy of Hacktivist surprisingly from the hand. I'm not sure why. We arrive at a very tricky conundrum here, and I want you to join in me as we figure out what's the best way to work around this. Now, they spent the last turn installing a Liberator accounts, dipping down to 9 credits. That was an expensive install. This means that I can single advance the reverse accounts, pop it, bring them down to 5 credits, which gives me Brian Stinson range. Now the problem with doing this is that they played the Hacktivist last turn, which means that if I take this line of play, I'm gonna have to be forced to discard 2 random cards from hand. So given that, what is the best line of play from this position? You see the emoji there? It's time to pause the video. I'll review the answer shortly. Now obviously the Stinson play is not going to work out. There's no point in getting big money when you don't have a C-source to use it because Hacktivist trashed it. Don't forget Wampoa is in the bin as well, so it's going to be very difficult to get the combo online if it gets trashed by Hacktivists. So instead, I played the hedge fund after taking a credit and then continued applying the reverse account Stinson threat by advancing the reverse accounts. In hindsight, I think playing the scarcity of resources would have been a better play, because I would need to play the scarcity anyway if I were to fire off the Stinson combo eventually. And I might as well play the scarcity sooner rather than later, because this gives my opponent one free turn of playing resources at cost price, which is not good for me. So yeah, misplay by me, but at least I did not go for the worst play, I guess. So my opponent thinks for a while, decides to play gamble for the first click, and they're definitely thinking about contesting their reversed accounts there. As you notice, they know that it's the reverse accounts and they need to contest it, but if they do, I'm coming out ahead because that cost them a lot of money that could potentially put them in Stinson range. You'll notice that Seesaws is the third card I drew from R&D as well after the indexing. So they might be thinking of running R&D here to fetch the agenda if it's the fourth card they place. This is something that is on my mind all the time. The fact that they know the 5 cards on R&D and that any of them might be agendas. They finally rebirth into the Omar, which happens 90% of the time, and go for Omar run on archives. So again, the bad part working against me big time. They don't even need to get Paperclip out because it's a Trace 3 that they have to beat with 2 bad parts. So easy. They run HQ here, accessing my Seesaws. Not much gain for them. They're just getting an Omar trigger there. So now they're pretty rich, 16 credits. I cannot reverse their accounts. So I'm going to continue with a setup turn, pop up on archives to ensure that they don't get any more Omar runs. Or, well, they still will, but they're going to fuel my economy while doing so. I'm happy with that. And then advance the reverse accounts again. Make sure you run it. It feels so much worse playing reverse accounts without dedication ceremony, but that's the price you pay. Thankfully, that delaying scarcity by 1 turn did not affect the outcome anyway. My opponent didn't install any resources last turn, so it did not matter. There is an argument to be made for putting Newshound on archives. I wanted to save it for R&D because it seems like they are going to hammer R&D now, and a Newshound R&D would completely solve that. Okay, down 16 credits. Scarcity is up. It's time. They did not contest the reverse account, so I'm going to force them to lose 12 credits and then play Stinson into IP. Where's my IPO? Didn't I play an Oh, yeah, I reshuffled the IPO with 1 power. This was the biggest mistake I made this game. I used 1 power to bury an IPO thinking that I would get it back again. Stupidly enough, I forgot I was running Stinson in this deck. You need at least 1 IPO in your bin to take advantage of Stinson's big money. So I gained 9 credits in a situation where I really had no reason not to gain, what's that? 13 credits from. That's a big difference. I'm not happy about that. But the game goes on. I'm going to put license acquisition in the remote here. I'm getting tired of waiting for the corporate town, but I know that since I've been burying cards with 1 power and then I'm running 2 copies of corporate town, it is bound to show up very likely in the next few cards of R&D. So I'm just going to wait for it here. It still doesn't show up. Okay, we'll continue fortifying R&D here and maybe getting some money off hedge fund. Archangel, interesting. Okay, so this diversifies my options for R&D ice. I decide to put the Archangel on R&D. Now, Archangel is very useful on R&D because if they go for a turning wheel run on R&D, they'll need to actually beat the trace on Archangel or break the subroutine. Otherwise, I can bounce turntable and make them... both turning wheel and turntable for that matter, making them very sad because it directly impacts their win condition. So Archangel actually going to be pretty good. Yes! I found it! I found it! Okay, this is the best feeling in the world. I haven't won the game yet. I'm so far away from it. I only have 4 agenda points. But here, free corporate town in your face. Sure, my opponent has 19 credits, but are they really going to pay 6 for the outer news hound, 6 for the inner news hound, and the Raven tax? I didn't think so. Instead, they are going to assault my central with their second indexing. And I show them the bad news. It's an Archangel they have to beat. Alright, let's go. Let's do this. So, they can still afford to let Traces fire, mind you. Again, because I made the dumb mistake of not properly Stinsoning up, I'm poorer than I really should be. I should have 4 more credits than I do right now if I had left the IPO in the bin. They allow the Trace to fire, so I could only do the base Trace 6. They allow Raven Trace to fire, again, not going to be very relevant. My opponent had a slip of mind there, decided to give me the power counter, save the 3 credits, but I asked them, you sure? And they realized, yeah, if they're gonna get a QPM, sure they can host a QPM Film Critic, but yeah, I mean, you know, this is a really bad idea, a bottom line. You don't want to give a free Raven counter to someone who can easily demolish your film critic and do nasty stuff like exchange and make QPMs invulnerable on access. So yeah, my opponent takes it back, which is all fine and good, and they get to index me. Now, I do know they have a Mad Dash in their hand because I've seen it through the injects, so that is no question. They can win if they find two 2-pointers. Alternatively, they can find a 2-pointer and a 1-pointer, swapping that 1-pointer for my Bill as the 2-pointer. But that 1-pointer cannot be QPM because they cannot steal QPM the normal way. If they get a QPM, they have to host it on Film Critic first, which means they can't use Turntable. So this is an incredibly defensive agenda suite. As you can see, it's actually pretty solid. Combined with the fact that, if you remember early on the game, I one powered a Bill and a food. So my opponent's going to Omar, thinking that it's going to be easier to get through R&D this way to get their top deck R&D agenda. But again, there are not that many agendas left. There's of the 2-point agendas, there are 6 of them. 3 foods, 3 Bills. 2 of them are in the score area. 1 of them is in my hand. And 2 of them have been buried. 1 Bill and 1 food are at the bottom of the deck, and I know it. There have been no shuffling. They were all 1 forward. So there's literally only 1 2-pointer remaining in R&D. The chances of them winning are super slim. They would have to sweep my hand, I guess, by getting the food from my hand, and then Mad Dash R&D to steal a Bill, right? Or Mad Dash R&D to steal the second license acquisition and then turntable it for my Bill, or the 15 minutes. So they had outs, but they were super narrow. Now, they let me fire the IP block trace here, and I started doing some maths, and I realized, okay, I don't really need the money. I can match them 1-for-1 on credits. I can afford to do this at this point because they're going to come out behind after I get corporate town triggers. It's quite clear by this point my opponent's not going to contest the corporate town. So I'm going to come out ahead if I pump credits into the trace, and I will, because they cannot repeatedly run my archive server with Omar. Omar is only once per turn. So if I can fizzle their Omar run by giving them a tag with the IP block trace, it's going to be very hard for them to win. Now I cannot keep them out guaranteed, but I can invest just enough money right there to force them to use a lot of money, putting them in Stinson range. So next turn is going to be a huge turn for me. Meanwhile, they access R&D, except that they don't. They access HQ instead. I thought they would go for R&D, but instead they sweep my entire hand with all their turning wheel counters and naturally find the global food from my hand. This puts them at 4 agenda points, and oh yeah, now they Mad Dash R&D and win the game. So again, their only out here is actually the 1 project Bill remaining on R&D, right? If it's a 1-pointer on top of R&D, the license acquisition of the 15 minutes, they would win if they turntable the Bill, but now I'm making sure they can't turntable it because I'm boosting the Archangel trace out of their reach. So they cannot use turntable. They can only get up to 6 points at most. But it was the 1 altar that they had, and they played to that beautiful out. I give credit where credit is due, and my opponent Jonas played that last turn so perfectly beautifully. It left me shaking in my seat, even though I was the one that lost the game. Because even though I made some big misplays this game, like, you know, reshuffling the IPO, I could have blocked them out of archives if I had enough money to pump the IP block trace. I could blame this loss all on me, but at the end of the day, it took a really skilled player to know what they're doing on that final turn. Because here I was, sitting very comfortably in my seat, thinking, no matter what the indexing is, I'm probably gonna survive. Because their outs were so slim, and you know, if I were in their shoes, I would simply index, run R&D or Omar R&D and grab the top deck agenda and then try to contest the corporate town. That's what most people would have done. Most people would have been absolutely flustered by this janky card coming out of nowhere and absolutely misplay it. My opponent could have easily made the wrong play, as I said, just focusing on R&D and the remote, but instead, they realized that turning wheel on HQ was the way to go, because there were probably agendas in HQ, and boy, was my opponent right. So, they played to their outs, and as slim as those outs were, because they needed a build in the top 5 cards, they got it! And that's the beauty of Netrunner, playing to your outs, and playing in a smart way, against cards that you're probably not used to playing. Let's be real here. Jonas probably doesn't have that much experience dealing with a corporate town. And if there's one more thing I want to say about corporate town is that being a Wayland card, it's still better in NBN because you can res it for free with license acquisition. That's Wayland for you. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope this was a very educational experience. That game was nuts. Cheers to my opponent for that. Thanks for watching. Happy net running. Goodbye.